The year was 1945. Europe was a wasteland of burned cities and broken men. The cannons had finally gone silent, yet the war had not ended for everyone. Across the Atlantic, far from the ruins of Berlin or the rubble of Cologne, barbed wire stretched across quiet American fields. Guard towers cast long shadows over rows of wooden barracks. And into this unexpected landscape stepped a small group of German women, secretaries, radio operators, auxiliary clerks, whose journey from the collapsing Reich to the heart of America would be stranger than anything they had imagined. They were young, most of them barely in their 20s. Some still wore their hair pinned in the neat, practical styles of Luftwaffe staff offices. Others had hastily tied scarves around their heads as they boarded the ships that carried them from Europe's battered ports. None of them had planned for this ending. They had joined the war effort behind desks, typing orders and transmitting coded weather reports, believing the fighting would stay far away. But as the Allies advanced in the spring of '45, entire rear echelon units were swept up. Surrender came not in a blaze of glory, but with a white flag raised in fear and exhaustion. Trucks took them to prisoner assembly points. Trains took them farther still. Then the sea, gray, endless, and cold, bore them to the enemy's homeland. When they disembarked on American soil, the first thing they noticed was the sky. It was enormous and bright, with a clarity unlike the smoke-choked air of wartime Germany. The second was the silence. No sirens, no bombers overhead, no distant rumble of artillery. Just wind, birds, and the unfamiliar hum of American trucks. For women who had grown used to ration cards and hunger, the neat order of U.S. military logistics was shocking. They were given blankets, examined by medics, herded through processing stations where polite but brisk American officers clipped their names and ranks onto cards. Then came the train rides inland, past fields of corn and white clapboard houses, past children who waved at the prisoners from roadside fences. It felt unreal, like stepping into a film where the war existed only in newspapers. Their destination was Camp Swift, a sprawling prisoner-of-war facility in Texas, though some would later be transferred to smaller branch camps scattered across the country. To the Americans, these women were an oddity. The vast majority of German POWs were men, soldiers captured in North Africa, sailors taken from U-boats, infantrymen who had surrendered in droves during the final push into the Reich. But here were women, clerks and typists of the Luftwaffe Signals Corps, their crisp blue-gray uniforms stripped of insignia but still bearing the faint scent of machine oil and cigarette smoke. Guards stared for a beat too long, unused to seeing female prisoners. Some of the younger GIs whispered jokes. Older officers kept them firmly in line. The Geneva Conventions still applied. Life behind the wire was strange but not brutal. Each day began with roll call, a whistle breaking the Texas dawn. The women lined up on dusty parade grounds, boots crunching gravel, breath visible in the chill of early morning. They were counted, inspected, then dispersed to their work assignments. Some mended uniforms, others sorted mail or typed English reports under watchful eyes. A few were sent to nearby farms, harvesting cotton or vegetables under the relentless sun. Compared to the hunger and chaos back home, the camp was shockingly orderly. The bunks were simple but dry. There was soap. There were showers, warm ones, sometimes. Letters could be written, though they were censored and slow to arrive. The food, however, was the first real surprise. Breakfast trays held eggs, oatmeal, sometimes fruit. Lunch might be stew with hunks of bread. Dinners varied, hearty, if plain. For women raised on turnip soups and ersatz coffee through the final years of Nazi collapse, this was a feast. Yet it also carried an undercurrent of humiliation. To be fed by the enemy, to eat better in defeat than they had in supposed victory, gnawed at their pride. Some muttered that this was propaganda, a performance meant to make them doubt the Reich. Others simply ate in silence, eyes lowered, letting the food speak its own quiet truth. There were moments when the distance between captor and captive shrank almost imperceptibly. Guards traded cigarettes for small sketches. An American sergeant, seeing one woman cry over a letter from bombed-out Cologne, awkwardly offered her his handkerchief. These were brief, fragile gestures, often followed by self-conscious retreats back to discipline. But they planted seeds of doubt in the narrative many of the women had been taught, that the enemy was barbaric, cruel, less than human. Then came the day the mess hall served something new. It arrived in heavy metal pots, carried by kitchen staff with bemused smiles. The scent was unfamiliar, salty, briny, rich with butter. When the lids clattered open, the women stared. Piled high inside were crimson shells, spindly legs, and curling tails, lobsters and shrimp, glistening under steam. A nervous ripple ran through the line. Someone laughed, a sharp, incredulous sound. Another muttered, "Mirisungazifer, sea vermin." To many of them, this food looked like something dredged from nightmares. In Germany, seafood beyond herring was rare, and these strange armored creatures seemed alien. The Americans, overhearing their muttered disgust, chuckled. Some guards leaned against the walls, amused. "Eat up," one drawled, gesturing with a ladle. "It's good eating," the women whispered among themselves. Some shook their heads, stepping past with tight lips. Others poked suspiciously at the offering, lifting a lobster claw as if it might move. The sight was absurd, former members of Hitler's auxiliary forces recoiling from what the Americans considered a coastal delicacy, and, more practically, a cheap source of protein in wartime. Pride and hunger collided in that moment. Several women refused outright, choosing instead to nibble dry bread. A few, emboldened by curiosity or simple exhaustion, took small portions. One, a dark-haired typist named Lotte, sat at the edge of a bench, staring down the pink, curled shrimp on her tray. She had not seen meat this fresh in years. Slowly, with the air of someone defying fate, she bit. Her eyes widened. Another bite followed, then another, faster. She said something under her breath, a quick, startled, "Das ist gut." Others glanced at her, eyebrows raised. One by one, hesitation cracked. The first laughter was mocking. The second, softer, was shared. For the guards, it was an amusing spectacle. For the women, it was something stranger, a tiny betrayal of their own expectations. They had arrived certain of the enemy's savagery. They had mocked his food, his culture, his supposed decadence. Yet here they were, cheeks flushed, quietly devouring what hours earlier had seemed inedible. The room hummed with cautious curiosity. Pride bent but did not break. It simply shifted, making space for surprise. That night, letters were written, some factual, some slyly humorous. "They feed us strange ocean creatures," one woman scribbled, "but they taste better than we imagined." Another confessed that for the first time since capture, she had laughed without bitterness. The war felt distant in that moment, the Reich's iron grip loosening with each unexpected bite. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. But it was a crack in the wall. For America, this was no grand strategy. Seafood was simply plentiful and cheap. But unintended diplomacy was at work. A meal that cost pennies could do what leaflets and lectures could not: unsettle old certainties, whisper of another way of living. Kindness can arrive in strange forms, even disguised as a steaming pot of shrimp. Outside the barracks that night, the Texas stars stretched vast and cold. Some of the women lingered by the fence, talking quietly, voices carrying hints of wonder and weariness. Home felt impossibly far. The Reich, once so certain and unyielding, now seemed fragile in their memories. War had taken much: brothers, fathers, cities, faith. But here, on foreign soil, an unexpected thing had arrived. Not freedom, not yet, but the faint taste of another world. They could not know it then, but this small, almost comic encounter would linger long after the camp gates opened. Many would return to a broken Germany with a memory they could not quite shake, that their enemies had fed them well, even kindly. For now, though, the shift was only beginning, fragile as a first bite. Hunger had cracked pride. Curiosity had followed. And somewhere deep inside, the certainty that had fueled a brutal war wavered. Just enough to let something new slip in. Lotte awoke before dawn, as she often did now, not to orders barked by officers or the wail of air raid sirens, but to the distant clatter of pots from the camp kitchen. Life behind the wire had settled into a rhythm, one she would never have imagined when she wore the Luftwaffe eagle on her sleeve. Yet even within this strange order, something had shifted since that first improbable meal. The memory of laughter echoing through the mess hall, of hesitant bites turning to eager ones, lingered like a scent that would not fade. Still, pride was a stubborn companion. The women reminded one another often that they were prisoners. Kindness from an enemy was dangerous to believe in. Days grew warmer. Work details pulled them into the Texas sun, where they picked vegetables, folded laundry, or kept records for the guards. The Americans treated them with a formality that felt neither cruel nor intimate, respectful but distant. Yet after the seafood night, small gestures multiplied. A young guard named Miller, whose German was clumsy but earnest, practiced phrases with Lotte as she handed him stacks of typed reports. Another, Corporal Hayes, grinned whenever he saw one of the women smuggle an extra bread roll from the kitchen. These were not friendships, not exactly. But they were no longer faceless enemies. Letters from home, when they came, carried grief and hunger. Cities burned. Fathers were missing. Brothers lay somewhere in Russian mud. The Reich had promised triumph. Now it delivered silence and rubble. One evening, reading by the thin light of a lantern, Lotte traced the lines of her sister's scrawl. "We boil nettles for soup. The little ones cry with hunger." She folded the paper slowly, her chest hollow. Around her, others read similar news. Some cried softly, some stared at nothing at all. For the first time, the abundance of the camp's food felt like a wound as well as a mercy. It forced them to confront a truth their leaders had hidden. The enemy could feed them better than their own nation ever had. The Americans, sensing this quiet grief, responded not with speeches but with action. Extra rations appeared. Sometimes fruit, sometimes thick slices of bread, sometimes the strange, briny creatures again. Shrimp tossed in butter, lobster cracked open with blunt knives. Each time, the initial jokes faded faster. Hunger no longer argued with pride. Lotte became the one who taught others how to peel shrimp, laughing softly when her friend Greta grimaced at the texture. "Don't think," she teased. "Just eat." Yet acceptance brought its own conflict. Some women wrestled with guilt. To enjoy the food of the enemy felt like betrayal, not of the Reich. Few still clung to that fantasy, but of the suffering families back home. "My mother starves," one whispered to Lotte, tears streaking her face, "and I sit here eating like a queen." Lotte had no answer. She too felt the shame settle deep, heavy and unsolvable. But she also felt another truth emerging. These Americans were not monsters. The propaganda that painted them as savage conquerors had cracked and fallen away like old plaster. In its place came a complicated, human understanding. The change did not go unnoticed by the guards. Miller, shy but curious, once asked Lotte why they had laughed at the lobster. She hesitated, then told him honestly, "We thought you were fools, eating bugs from the sea." He laughed so hard he startled the other guards. "Bugs," he repeated, wiping his eyes. "Best bugs you'll ever eat." The exchange was brief, but something passed between them, a strange, quiet equality. Not friendship, not forgiveness, but recognition. Weeks turned to months. The war was officially over. Japan surrendered that summer. Some camps celebrated with fireworks visible far beyond the fences. The German women watched in silence, caught between relief and the ache of captivity. Release would come, but no one knew when. The only certainty was change. The Reich was gone, its certainties dead with it. And the idea of America, once distant and villainous, had taken on a new, disorienting shape. Not saviors, not saints, but human beings capable of generosity even toward the defeated. One evening, as the sun bled across the Texas sky, the women gathered outside their barracks. The air was thick with the smell of salt and butter, seafood again. The kitchen had prepared a final feast before some of the prisoners were transferred east to begin the long journey home. Lotte stood with Greta and a few others, watching guards and cooks haul steaming pots into the open yard. The scene felt almost festive, absurdly so for a place still ringed by barbed wire. Someone set up a battered gramophone. Faint American swings spilled into the dusk. Lotte hesitated with the first bite. It was only food, she told herself, yet it felt like more. Around her, the other women ate with easy familiarity now, laughter quick and warm. Greta leaned over and whispered, half joking, half serious, "When we go home, will we tell them this? That the Americans fed us like queens?" Lotte swallowed, tasting brine and smoke and something bittersweet she could not name. "I don't know," she said quietly. "But I'll remember." The night deepened. Guards relaxed, leaning against fence posts. Prisoners lingered in small knots, eating slowly, speaking softly in a mix of German and halting English. For a few hours, the camp felt almost weightless, suspended between war and peace. The barbed wire gleamed under moonlight, but it seemed less sharp. Later, as the feast ended and lanterns flickered out, Lotte remained awake on her bunk, listening to the muted hum of crickets beyond the walls. She thought of home, the ruins, the hunger, the questions no one would dare ask aloud. She thought of Miller's clumsy German, of Hayes's easy grin, of the strange kindness hidden in the meals they had once mocked. And she realized, with a sudden clarity that startled her, that a single taste could undo years of certainty. It could pierce propaganda more deeply than argument. It could make an enemy human. Tomorrow, perhaps, the fences would still stand. Orders would come, trains would rattle east, and she would return to a land broken and bitter. But something irreversible had happened here, something small and profound. The war had ended inside her long before the gates would open. And somewhere beyond the dark, in kitchens she could not yet imagine, Americans still boiled shrimp and cracked lobster shells, unaware that a quiet revolution of the heart had begun the moment a handful of frightened young women dared to taste what they had once ridiculed.